Stand with me now in the silence of the Sahara, where the wind moves across dunes that stretch beyond sight, beyond comprehension, sand sculpted into waves frozen in endless motion. And listen carefully to what the desert is trying to tell you. Because beneath your feet, beneath 9 million square kilometers of golden dust, beneath the scorching heat that shimmers and dances in mirages, beneath the silence so profound it feels almost sacred, there lies a secret, a memory, a world so utterly transformed that it seems impossible, almost like a dream within a dream. And yet, 10,000 years ago, this desert was green. Not just patches of grass near scattered oases, not just a slightly less harsh version of what exists today, but impossibly, vibrantly, achingly green. Rivers the size of the modern Nile flowed where now there is only dust. Lake Megachad, larger than the Caspian Sea, sparkled where now there are salt pans that crack in geometric patterns under the relentless sun. Forests of acacia and tamarisk whispered where now the wind howls through empty canyons. And in this paradise, in this garden that has been erased almost completely from human memory, there lived a people, a civilization so advanced, so sophisticated, so utterly lost to time, that we are only just now, beginning to understand what was here. The satellite passes overhead in the darkness, invisible, silent, its synthetic aperture radar piercing through the sand with electromagnetic waves that can see what human eyes cannot. And there, appearing on screens in research stations thousands of miles away, are the ghosts, the shadows, the unmistakable signatures of cities, of roads, of irrigation systems, of walls and buildings and structures that speak of planning, of intention, of a world that thrived when our ancestors in Europe were still learning to farm, when the great pyramids of Egypt were not even dreams, when human civilization was taking its first uncertain steps toward what we would become. And you might be watching this from anywhere in the world tonight. From a city apartment where the glow of screens pushes back the dark, from a quiet suburban home where trees rustle outside your window, from a place where water flows freely from taps and greenery grows without thought. And I wonder, where are you watching from tonight? What landscape surrounds you as you drift towards sleep? Comment below and tell me, because in this moment, across the vast distances of space and time, we are connected, you and I, to those ancient people who walked beneath stars that looked almost the same, who wondered at the universe, who built and dreamed and loved and lost, just as we do. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing not in the desert as it is now, but as it was then, 10,000 years before the present, when the African humid period had transformed this entire vast region into something that would seem miraculous to us today. The ground beneath your feet is not sand but soil, rich, dark, capable of supporting life in abundance. Grass spreads in every direction, not the scrubby desert plants that cling to existence with desperate efficiency, but tall grasses that wave in breezes, carrying the scent of water, of growth, of possibility. In the distance, you see a herd of elephants, not desert elephants surviving on the margins, great herds numbering in the hundreds, moving with slow dignity across plains that stretch to the horizon, their tusks gleaming white in the morning sun, their great ears flapping to cool themselves in the gentle warmth of midday. Giraffes browse on acacia trees heavy with leaves, their long necks reaching upward in that peculiar graceful motion that seems to defy physics, their spotted coats glowing golden in the afternoon light. Hippos wallow in rivers that flow year-round, their massive bodies half submerged in water so clear you can see fish darting between their legs. Their grunts and snorts echo across water that reflects the endless blue of the sky. And in those rivers, crocodiles bask on muddy banks, their ancient eyes watching, waiting. Fish leap and flash silver in the sunlight. Birds, thousands upon thousands of birds, wheel and dive and sing in a cacophony of life that fills the air with sound and color and movement. But it is not just the animals that make this place extraordinary. It is the people, the humans who have learnt to thrive in this landscape, who have taken the raw materials of nature and transformed them into something unprecedented, something that would lay the foundations for civilizations yet to come. Look, there, in the distance, rising from the grasslands like a promise, like a declaration of human ambition and capability. Structures, buildings of stone and mud brick, arranged not in the haphazard clusters of temporary settlements, but in geometric patterns that speak of planning, of forethought, of a society that thinks not just of today or tomorrow, but of generations yet unborn. Smoke rises from cooking fires in graceful columns that bend in the breeze. The smell of roasting meat and baking bread drifts on the wind, mingling with the scent of herbs and spices. And you can hear, if you listen carefully, the sounds of human voices, laughter bubbling up from children at play, the rhythmic chanting of work songs as people labor together, argument and discussion from elders debating in the shade of a great tree, the eternal soundtrack of people living together in community. This is Gobero, one of the largest and most important Neolithic burial grounds ever discovered in the Sahara, found in 2000 in what is now Niger, in a region so inhospitable that the archaeologists who discovered it called it the Sahara Desert, the desert of deserts, a name that speaks of ultimate aridity, of a place where nothing can survive. And yet, when Paul Sereno and his team dug into that seemingly lifeless sand, when they carefully excavated layer after layer of compressed time, they found something that would make hardened scientists weep. Not just bones, an entire civilization preserved in the sand like flowers pressed in a book. More than 200 burials spanning 5,000 years, from 10,000 years ago to 5,000 years ago, a chronicle written in bone and pottery and stone tools of a people who thrived and adapted, and ultimately, like everything, passed away. But it's one burial in particular that stops you cold, that reaches across 10 millennia and grabs your heart. A woman, her skeleton curled protectively around 2 children, their small bones nestled against hers in an embrace that has lasted 10,000 years, one arm around each child, her body forming a protective curve that death itself could not break. But here's what makes this unbearable, beautiful, profound. The team found pollen grains mixed with the soil, flowers. Someone had laid flowers with them, 10,000 years ago, in a moment of grief, so raw it echoes across time. Someone gathered wild flowers from the grasslands and placed them gently around this mother and her children, before covering them with earth. And when archaeologists brushed away the last grains of sand from those bones, when they saw that eternal embrace, more than one had to step away. Because some things transcend time. Some gestures of love are so fundamental to being human that they bypass our rational minds and speak directly to our hearts. The dead woman was young, perhaps in her 20s. The children were 5 and 8 years old. What happened to them, we'll never know. Disease, perhaps, an accident, some tragedy that struck all 3 at once. But what we do know, what the evidence speaks to with absolute clarity, is that they were loved, deeply, tenderly, eternally, and beside them, other burials. Each one a story, each one a life, fully lived. A man whose grave goods include elaborately decorated fishing hooks, not simple bent thorns but carefully crafted implements showing mastery of the craft. Someone knew him as the fisherman, as the one who provided, who fed his people, who knew the waters and their secrets. And when he died, those who loved him made sure he would be remembered for what he did, for who he was, for how he contributed to the survival of his community. Think about that for a moment. Think about what it means that they buried him with his tools, that his identity was so tied to this skill that even in death, even when he was being prepared for whatever afterlife they imagined, those who loved him wanted him to be remembered as the fisherman, wanted future generations to know what he did, how he contributed, who he was. A young woman, her skeleton showing signs of having borne children, buried with elaborate jewelry, beads of shell and stone arranged around her neck and wrists, polished to catch the light, each one representing hours of patient work. Someone loved her enough to adorn her for eternity, to make sure she entered the next world beautiful, respected, remembered. An elderly man with worn joints and old fractures that had healed, showing a life of hard physical labor, buried with simple tools but positioned with care at the center of a family grouping. Honored, valued, remembered not for possessions but for his place in the community, for the work he did, the life he lived. And children, So many children buried with tenderness that makes archaeologists weep at their excavation tables. Infants cradled in adults' arms, older children surrounded by small toys and trinkets, showing that even 10,000 years ago, even in a world so different from ours that we can barely imagine it, parents grieved for lost children with the same aching intensity that they do today. That childhood was recognized as precious. That innocence lost was mourned with a depth of feeling that transcends culture and time. And the pottery. Oh, the pottery they left behind tells tales of sophistication that challenge everything we thought we knew about early African civilizations. Vessels decorated with wave patterns, zigzag lines, geometric designs that show not just functionality, but aesthetics. The universal human need to make things beautiful, to transform the purely utilitarian into art. And the patterns themselves suggest contact, communication, trade with distant peoples, because similar designs appear hundreds of miles away, in settlements along ancient rivers that no longer flow, suggesting networks of exchange, of cultural influence, of ideas flowing across vast distances like water flows across land. These were not isolated communities scratching out a meager existence in scattered pockets of habitability. No, these were connected peoples, trading, communicating, sharing knowledge and techniques and stories, sharing artistic styles and spiritual beliefs, sharing the accumulated wisdom of generations, building something larger than any single settlement, building, perhaps, the earliest stirrings of what we might call civilization, the first tentative steps toward the complex societies that would eventually emerge along the Nile, in Mesopotamia, in the Indus Valley. But Gumbrio is just one piece, one fragment of a much larger story, and to understand that story, to truly grasp what was lost when the Sahara transformed from garden to desert, we must travel deeper into the past and deeper into the sand. Nabta Playa. The name means nothing to most people, just an empty basin in southern Egypt, near the border with Sudan, a place where nothing grows and no one lives, where the temperature regularly exceeds 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade, if you can find shade, where rain might fall once a decade if at all, where the very air seems hostile to life. And yet in the 1970s, when archaeologists began investigating this forsaken place, they found something that would shake the foundations of what we thought we knew about ancient Africa. Stone circles, but not just any stone circles. These megaliths, some weighing several tons, were arranged in patterns that align with the summer solstice. They're more than 7,000 years old. 7,000 years old, making them older than Stonehenge, older than the great stone circles of Europe that we celebrate in textbooks, built when most of Europe was still populated by scattered bands of hunter-gatherers, when agriculture was just beginning to spread from its Middle Eastern origins, when the concept of cities was still millennia in the future. But here's what makes Nabta Playa extraordinary, what makes it arguably one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. The stones align with the belt stars of Orion, with Sirius the dog star which would later become sacred to the Egyptians. This wasn't simple stargazing, this was systematic astronomy. These people were mapping the heavens with precision that wouldn't be seen again for thousands of years. Think about what that means. 7,000 years ago, when most of Europe was still figuring out agriculture, when Stonehenge was still 3,000 years in the future, people in the Sahara were building astronomical observatories. They were tracking celestial cycles. They were using the stars to predict the arrival of monsoon rains with accuracy that would have impressed any ancient civilization. They understood that the rising of Sirius just before dawn coincided with the flooding season. They knew the summer solstice marked the peak of the rains. They had mapped the rotation of the sky with such accuracy that modern astronomers are still analyzing their work, still marveling at how people without telescopes or computers could achieve such precision. And this astronomical knowledge, this careful observation of the cosmos, this systematic recording of celestial patterns, required something even more fundamental. It required permanence, stability, a society sophisticated enough to pass knowledge from generation to generation, to maintain traditions over centuries, to value the abstract and intellectual alongside the practical necessities of survival. This was not a handful of nomads scratching out an existence on the margins. This was a civilization. If you're enjoying this journey into the past tonight, if these glimpses of a lost world are sparking wonder in your mind as you drift towards sleep, take a moment to like this video. It helps others find their way here, to this quiet corner where curiosity meets contemplation, where the stories of our ancient ancestors can unfold at their own unhurried pace. The evidence accumulates like sediment, layer upon layer, each discovery adding depth to our understanding. At Nabta Playa, beneath those stone circles that mark the passage of seasons and stars, archaeologists found something else, something that speaks of even greater sophistication. The remains of elaborate structures, not simple windbreaks or temporary shelters that could be abandoned at a moment's notice, but buildings with stone foundations, with walls that were meant to last, storage facilities designed to protect grain and goods from the elements, evidence of settled life, of people who stayed in one place long enough to invest in permanent architecture, to build for the future, to create structures that their children and grandchildren would use. And scattered around these structures, carefully catalogued by patient archaeologists working in brutal heat, the bones of cattle, but not wild aurochs hunted opportunistically when the chance arose. No, these were domesticated cattle, their skeletal remains showing the telltale signs of selective breeding, of human management over many generations, smaller bodies than their wild cousins, different horn shapes, evidence of being fed and protected, of a people who had learned not just to hunt animals but to shape them, to transform wild creatures into partners in survival, into sources of milk and meat and leather, into symbols of wealth and status. The implications ripple outward like waves in still water. Cattle domestication in Africa happened earlier than in the Middle East, earlier than in Europe, earlier than anywhere else we know of. Here, in what is now desert, ancient Africans were pioneering agricultural techniques that would spread across the world. They were experimenting with animal husbandry, with selective breeding, with the fundamental transformation of human society from hunter-gatherers to food producers. And this transformation, this revolution, happened not in isolation, but as part of a broader flowering of human innovation and culture. Think about what it takes to domesticate cattle. Think about the knowledge required, the patience, the foresight, the social organization. You cannot simply catch a wild aurochs and expect it to become docile, to provide milk, to pull plows or carry burdens. Domestication is a multi-generational process. It requires selecting which animals to breed based on desirable traits, recognizing temperament and physical characteristics that can be enhanced through selective mating, maintaining herds over decades and centuries. It requires stable settlements where animals can be kept, protected from predators, fed during dry seasons when wild forage becomes scarce. It requires social organization sophisticated enough to prevent individuals from slaughtering breeding stock for short-term gain, to establish rules about who owns which animals, to develop systems for sharing the products, milk and meat and hides, in ways that maintain social harmony. It requires knowledge of animal behavior, of nutrition, of breeding cycles, of disease prevention, knowledge that must be accumulated over generations and passed down through careful teaching. In other words, it requires civilization, and the people of Nabta Playa had it. 7,000 years ago, they were managing herds, building structures, watching the stars, creating art, and doing it all in a place that is now utterly uninhabitable, doing it so successfully that they left traces we can still find today, traces that speak of knowledge and sophistication that challenge our assumptions about the primitive past. 300 miles to the west, in the Tasli Najara Mountains of Algeria, the rocks hold secrets painted in ochre and ash and charcoal, rock art created over thousands of years by successive generations of artists. 15,000 paintings, covering 28,000 square miles of canyon walls. 15,000. And when you look at these paintings, truly look at them, you realize you're standing in humanity's oldest art gallery. These aren't primitive stick figures, they're masterpieces, works of such sophistication that they rival anything produced in ancient Europe. There are cattle, thousands of them, rendered with such skill that you can identify individual breeds. You can see the artist's intimate knowledge in every line, the way a cow's dewlap hangs, the particular stance of a bull protecting his herd, the gentle curve of a calf nursing. These weren't just animals to these people. They were wealth, status, sustenance, identity. And beside the cattle, elephants, giraffes, hippopotami, crocodiles, an entire lost ecosystem captured in pigment and preserved by the dry air. The detail is extraordinary. You can see the spots on the giraffe, the wrinkles in the elephant's hide, the alert posture of an antelope sensing danger. The paintings show giraffes in mid-stride, their peculiar gait captured perfectly by artists who had watched them for hours. Elephants with their trunks raised in greeting or warning. Antelope frozen in the moment of flight, their muscles tense, their bodies coiled with the energy of escape. These artists knew their subjects, had watched them for hours, for days, for years, had developed the skill to translate three-dimensional movement onto two-dimensional rock, had learned to capture not just form but motion, not just appearance but essence. And that skill, that artistic ability, suggests time, leisure, a society with enough surplus that some of its members could specialize in art, could spend their days observing and creating rather than simply surviving, could develop techniques and styles that would be passed down through generations. But it's the boats that stop you cold. Boats. In the middle of the Sahara. Not simple dugouts, but sophisticated vessels with multiple oarsmen, with curving hulls designed for efficiency, some showing what appear to be sails. One painting shows a boat with 8 oarsmen working in perfect synchronization. Another depicts what might be a fishing fleet, multiple vessels arranged in a pattern that suggests coordinated hunting of fish. And in several panels, you see something extraordinary. People swimming, diving, their bodies captured mid-stroke with such accuracy that you can tell they're doing what we'd call a breaststroke. Children playing in water, jumping, splashing. These aren't artistic flourishes, these are documentary records, proof that the Sahara once held bodies of water so large, so permanent, that people developed entire aquatic cultures around them, that children learned to swim as naturally as children today learn to walk. That water was not a precious scarcity, but an abundant presence in daily life. But perhaps most striking, most moving, are the human figures themselves, rendered in what archaeologists call the round head period. Figures with elaborated headdresses that speak of status or spiritual significance, with decorative clothing that shows sophisticated textile work, engaged in ceremonies that hint at complex religious or spiritual practices, dancers moving in synchronized patterns that suggest rehearsed performances, rituals passed down through generations, figures that might be shamans or priests conducting rituals, their bodies adorned with special garments or paint, people gathering around what might be altars or sacred spaces, their postures suggesting reverence, awe, connection to something greater than themselves. And in some panels, scenes of daily life so detailed you can almost hear the conversations, see the gestures, feel the texture of lived experience. A woman grinds grain while a child plays nearby. The child's posture captured with such accuracy that you can tell they're running, moving with that particular loose-limbed energy that only children have, their arms outstretched for balance, their face surely lit with laughter, though painted features don't show such detail. A group of men share a meal, their bodies arranged in a circle that speaks of friendship, of community, of the simple human need to gather and eat together, to share not just food but companionship, stories, jokes, the countless small interactions that bind people into societies. People dance at what might be a wedding or a harvest celebration, their arms raised in gestures of joy, their bodies in motion, feet stamping, bodies swaying, and you can almost hear the music, the drums and voices that must have accompanied such celebrations, can almost feel the energy of people moving together in rhythm, sharing in collective joy. And in these images, across thousands of years, we see ourselves, reflected back through the ages, because the fundamental experiences of being human, of loving and working and celebrating and grieving, these have not changed. These connect us to our ancestors as surely as DNA connects us to our parents. The tasseli art spans thousands of years, beginning around 10,000 BCE and continuing until around 1000 BCE, nearly 9,000 years of artistic production. And as you move through time in these galleries, for that is what they are, The world's oldest art galleries open to the sky, painted on stone instead of canvas. You can see the climate changing. You can watch the green Sahara dying. In the earliest panels, water is everywhere. Hippopotami wallowing in rivers, crocodiles basking on banks, fishing scenes with people in boats pulling up nets heavy with fish, people swimming, their bodies captured mid-stroke, children playing in shallow water, splashing and laughing, the entire landscape alive with moisture and life, everything speaking of abundance, of water as a constant, reliable presence. But gradually, over centuries and millennia, the fauna changes. You can track it panel by panel, generation by generation. The water animals disappear first, the crocodiles and hippos vanishing from the paintings as their habitats dried up, as the rivers became seasonal streams, then intermittent pools, then memories. The boats become less common, the fishing scenes fewer and farther between. The paintings start to show cattle being led to increasingly distant water sources, showing the strain of a changing climate. The desert animals begin to appear. Camels start showing up in the art, their distinctive humped silhouettes marking a new era, an adaptation to aridity, animals that can go days without water, that can survive on thorny plants that cattle won't touch. And finally, in the latest panels, there are scenes of warfare, of competition over dwindling resources, of armed men with bows and spears, their weapons not raised in the hunt but pointed at other humans, of fortified settlements with walls and defenders, of a world in crisis as the rains failed and the grasslands turned to sand, as the paradise became desert, as abundance became scarcity, as cooperation gave way to competition, as the green Sahara died. And yet, before that ending, before the long dying of the green Sahara, there was a golden age, a period when human ingenuity reached heights that we are only now beginning to appreciate. And nowhere is this more evident than in the technological achievements of these ancient Saharans, in their mastery of water, of metal, of stone, of all the materials that humans have used to shape their world. Consider water, the fundamental requirement of life. And in particular, consider the engineering marvel of the Garamantes, a civilization that thrived in Libya from around 500 BCE to 500 CE, long after the main Green Sahara period, but inheriting knowledge and techniques from their predecessors, building on the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years. These people created underground tunnels called fogoras, running for miles beneath the desert surface, some stretching 40 miles or more, designed to tap into aquifers and transport water to surface settlements, with vertical shafts dug at regular intervals, sometimes hundreds of them to allow access for maintenance and to provide ventilation for the workers who dug and maintained these remarkable systems. This is not simple technology. This requires understanding of hydrology, of how water moves through different types of rock and soil, of how to locate underground water sources, of geology, of which rocks hold water and which don't, of engineering principles that would not be out of place in a modern university. It requires tools capable of digging through hard rock, bronze and iron implements that must be maintained and sharpened, techniques for breaking stone without causing collapse, without allowing sections to cave in and bury workers alive. It requires surveying techniques to ensure proper slope so that water flows by gravity from source to destination. Too steep and the water flows too fast, eroding the channels. Too shallow and the water becomes stagnant, breeds disease. Just right and the system can function for generations with minimal maintenance. The Garamantids achieved this precision. Their fogaras maintained a gradient of about 1 meter per kilometer, enough to keep water flowing. Not so much that it caused erosion. This level of accuracy over distances of 40 miles or more represents engineering sophistication, comparable to anything achieved in the ancient world. It requires social organization complex enough to marshal large labor forces, to coordinate the work of diggers and surveyors and maintainers, to maintain these systems over generations, to prevent any one community from monopolizing the water supply, to establish rules about distribution, about who gets how much, about maintenance obligations, about what happens when disputes arise. And most of all, it requires inherited knowledge, because you don't develop such systems overnight. You build on the accumulated wisdom of your predecessors. You refine techniques passed down through countless generations. You learn from the mistakes of those who came before. And when archaeologists used satellite imagery to map the full extent of the Garamantian Foggara systems, when they traced the shadows and patterns visible from space, they were astounded. Thousands of miles of underground tunnels, hundreds of separate systems, serving numerous settlements spread across what is now Libya, representing an investment of labor and engineering skill comparable to any ancient civilization, comparable to Roman aqueducts that we celebrate in textbooks, to Chinese canal systems, to any of the great water projects of antiquity, and suggesting that the Garamantas, and by extension their Green Sahara predecessors, were far more sophisticated than the historical records would suggest. Because here is the thing about history, about the narratives we tell ourselves about the past. They are written by those who survive, by those who build enduring monuments of stone and brick that can withstand millennia, by those whose scripts and languages persist through the ages, by those whose civilizations left written records that we can read and interpret. And for most of human history, African civilizations have been treated as footnotes, as primitive precursors to the real civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia, and the classical Mediterranean world, as people who contributed little to human progress beyond their eventual migration to places where real history began. But the evidence, the physical evidence emerging from the sand, the patient work of archaeologists and geologists and remote sensing specialists, tells a different story, tells of sophistication and innovation, of people solving complex problems with elegant solutions, of civilizations that thrived in challenging environments through ingenuity and adaptation. It tells of metallurgy, of copperworking that began in the Sahara as early as the 4th millennium BCE, earlier than in many places we consider the cradles of civilization, of peoples who understood smelting and casting and alloying, who could take green stones of malachite and blue stones of azurite, heat them to temperatures exceeding 1000 degrees Celsius in carefully constructed furnaces, and extract pure metal through processes that required understanding of chemistry and materials science that wouldn't be formally articulated by Western science for thousands of years. They created not just tools but jewelry, decorative objects, items whose only purpose was beauty, suggesting surplus, leisure, specialization, all the markers of complex society, suggesting that some people could spend their time creating beauty rather than simply surviving, that society valued aesthetics alongside utility, that there was time and resources for the purely ornamental, for the expression of creativity and artistic vision. It tells of trade networks that stretched across Africa, across distances that would challenge even modern travelers. Obsidian from volcanic regions hundreds of miles away found at Saharan sites. The distinctive black glass that forms when lava cools rapidly, prized for its ability to be worked into incredibly sharp tools and beautiful ornaments. Each piece representing a journey of hundreds of miles. Someone carried it, traded for it, valued it enough to transport it across vast distances. Seashells from the Atlantic and Mediterranean coasts discovered deep in the desert, interior, carried by traders who crossed vast distances, who knew the routes and the water sources, who built networks of exchange that connected distant communities. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan appearing in Egyptian tombs, that deep blue stone flecked with gold pyrite, suggesting trade routes that extended not just across Africa but into Asia, connecting civilizations separated by thousands of miles, suggesting regular contact, communication, exchange of goods and ideas across distances that would challenge even modern travelers with all our technology. These were not isolated peoples scratching out a living in scattered oases. These were participants in a vast commercial network that spanned continents, that connected Africa to the Middle East, to Central Asia, perhaps even to India and beyond. And the shells themselves tell stories. Cowrie shells from the Indian Ocean found in West African sites, carried across the width of the continent. Mediterranean shells in the interior Sahara, Atlantic shells in Egypt. Each one represents a journey, a trade route, a connection between distant peoples. And these connections were not random, not occasional lucky encounters between wandering groups, but systematic, regular, suggesting professional merchants, established routes, perhaps even way stations and caravanserais where travelers could rest and resupply, secure their goods, exchange information about conditions ahead. It tells of social stratification, of burials that vary dramatically in their grave goods. Some individuals interred with elaborate offerings, fine pottery decorated with complex geometric patterns, copper jewelry that required skilled metalworkers to create, stone tools of exquisite craftsmanship that go far beyond mere utility, weapons decorated with geometric patterns and symbolic imagery, while others have only simple tools, the basic necessities for the afterlife, suggesting hierarchies, leaders and followers, specialists and generalists, the intricate social structures that emerge when humans live together in large groups, when survival depends not just on individual skill but on cooperation, on organization, on the ability to marshal collective effort toward common goals. And perhaps most intriguingly, most provocatively, it tells of knowledge that may have migrated, that may have seeded other civilizations as the Sahara dried and its inhabitants were forced to move. To the Nile Valley where the great river still flowed, to the Mediterranean coast where rain still fell, to the Sahel region to the south where grasslands persisted, carrying with them their astronomical observations, their agricultural techniques, their artistic traditions, their stories and songs and beliefs, their accumulated wisdom of millennia. Consider the timing, the chronology that emerges when we look at the dates. The Sahara began its transformation from green to desert around 5000 BCE, gradually at first, then accelerating as feedback loops in the climate system amplified the initial changes. By 3000 BCE, most of the region was uninhabitable. The Great Lakes had dried, the rivers had stopped flowing, the grasslands had turned to sand. And what happened in Egypt around 3000 BCE? What remarkable transformation occurred along the banks of the Nile? The sudden emergence of a unified kingdom, of hieroglyphic writing that appears almost fully formed, of monumental architecture on a scale never before attempted, of a complex civilization that seemed to appear almost overnight. Might this not be, could this not be, the result of an influx of people carrying knowledge from the drying Sahara, bringing their expertise in astronomy and agriculture, their artistic traditions developed over millennia, their organizational abilities honed by managing complex societies in the Green Sahara, their collective memory of building and planning and creating? This is not to diminish Egyptian achievements, not to suggest that the Nile civilization was merely borrowed or second-hand, but rather to place it in context, to see it as part of a broader African story, a story in which knowledge and innovation flowed in multiple directions, where civilizations influenced each other, learned from each other, built upon each other's achievements, where Egypt was not the beginning but a continuation, where the roots go deeper, back into the Green Sahara, back to Nabta Playa and Gabbero and Tassili, back to the cattle herders and star watchers and artists who thrived when the desert was garden. And if you're finding resonance in this story tonight, if these connections across time and space are opening new perspectives in your mind, if you're seeing human history not as a series of isolated achievements, but as a great interconnected web of influences and migrations and knowledge transfer, consider subscribing to Simply About Earth, where curiosity finds its quiet corner and wonder takes its time, where we explore our planet's deep history with the reverence it deserves, where the past is not distant and dead but alive, speaking to us across the millennia, teaching us, connecting us to the long chain of human experience that stretches back to our earliest ancestors and forward to all who will come after. The satellite images reveal more secrets with each passing year, technology improving, techniques refining. In 2011, scientists using synthetic aperture radar to penetrate beneath the Saharan sands discovered river systems, vast networks of ancient waterways that once flowed through what is now desert, channels carved deep into bedrock, one nearly 400 miles long, suggesting rivers comparable to the modern Nile in scale, rivers that flowed year-round, that watered vast territories, that supported complex ecosystems and human civilizations. And along these rivers, visible as faint shadows in the ground-penetrating radar, the subtle differences in the way electromagnetic waves bounce back from different materials buried beneath the sand, the telltale signatures of human settlement. Anomalies in the sand that might be ruins, geometric patterns too regular to be natural, shadows that might be walls, roads, structures whose purposes we can only guess at, but whose existence speaks of human habitation, of communities that built in stone and brick, that left marks on the landscape that persist even after millennia of burial. In Chad, at a site called Ndi Marsef, researchers have documented what appears to be a complex of buildings, not just one or two structures, but dozens, arranged around what may have been a central plaza or gathering space, with structures of varying sizes, suggesting different functions. Residential dwellings where families lived, administrative buildings where community decisions were made, ceremonial structures where rituals were performed, where the community gathered to mark important events, births and deaths, marriages and initiations, the passage of seasons, the movements of celestial bodies, and the preliminary dating based on pottery fragments and organic materials found at the site, suggests occupation during the African humid period. When this region was habitable, when water was abundant, when human communities could grow and flourish and build, when there was time and resources for creating permanent architecture, for investing in structures that would last for generations. Each discovery raises more questions than it answers. Questions that drive archaeologists back into the field, season after season. How large were these settlements? How many people lived here? Dozens? Hundreds? Thousands? What languages did they speak? Did they have writing, or did they preserve knowledge through oral tradition? What stories did they tell their children as night fell and stars emerged overhead? Stories of heroes and gods, of the origins of their people, of why the world is the way it is. What songs did they sing as they worked, as they celebrated, as they mourned? What jokes did they laugh at around the evening fires? What fears kept them awake at night? Fears of predators, of drought, of conflict with neighboring communities, of the thousand dangers that threatened survival in a world without modern medicine or technology. What hopes carried them forward? Hopes for good harvests, for healthy children, for peace with their neighbors, for understanding the mysteries of the universe, for connection with the divine. We will never know the answers to most of these questions. The people of the Green Sahara left no written records, no epics carved in stone like the ancient Mesopotamians, no histories preserved on clay tablets like the Babylonians, no libraries that survived the millennia like those of Egypt. They lived and died and were forgotten, their very existence erased by the advancing desert, buried beneath sand dunes that shift and flow like waves on an ocean of time. And only now, only through the patient work of archaeologists, spending months in brutal heat carefully excavating sites grain by grain, only through the cold eye of satellites orbiting overhead, mapping shadows beneath the sand, only through the careful analysis of pollen trapped in ancient lake sediments telling us what plants grew when, of animal bones, telling us what species lived where, of pottery fragments and stone tools, and the thousand small artifacts that survive when everything else decays, only now are we beginning to reconstruct their world. But in that absence, in that silence where there should be voices, in that blank space where there should be written history, there is room for imagination, for connection, for the recognition that these were people, fully human, possessed of the same range of emotions and capabilities that we have, the same capacity for love and hate, for courage and fear, for creativity and destruction, the same fundamental human nature that we see in ourselves when we look honestly in the mirror, and in their story of thriving in abundance when the Sahara was green and lush, of adapting to change as the climate shifted and the rains began to fail, of ultimately being forced to move or perish as their environment transformed around them. There is a mirror, reflecting our own moment, our own relationship with a changing climate, our own questions about resilience and adaptation and survival in a world that is warming, that is changing, that is presenting us with challenges our ancestors never faced. Picture them now, as evening falls across the grasslands, as the sun descends in a blaze of orange and gold that paints the sky in colors so vivid they seem unreal, colors that we see only rarely in our modern world, colors that filled their sky every evening as the sun set and the day cooled. The cattle have been brought in for the night, secured in corrals made of thorn branches, protection against the lions and hyenas and leopards that hunt in the darkness, predators that are as much a part of this landscape as the humans, that must be respected, guarded against, understood. Cooking fires spring to life across the settlement. Dozens of them, one for each family, their smoke rising straight in the still evening air, and the smell fills the twilight. Smoke and roasting meat and porridge bubbling in clay pots, bread baking in earth ovens, herbs and spices that have been gathered. The smells of home, of family, of community. Smells that would be familiar to any human across any time period, because the basic rhythms of human life have not changed as much as we might think. A child runs between the houses, chasing friends in some eternal game whose rules are understood without explanation, their laughter high and clear in the cooling air, voices filled with the unself-conscious joy that belongs only to children, children who have not yet learned to worry about the future, who live completely in the present moment, in the joy of movement and friendship and play. Elders sit in the doorways, men and women who have seen many seasons pass, who remember when the settlement was smaller, when there were fewer houses, fewer people, who can tell stories of their grandparents and the world they knew. They talk in the measured tones of those who have earned the right to speak, discussing the rains, whether they were sufficient this year, whether the cattle are healthy, whether the young people are learning the old ways properly. The eternal concerns of elders in every culture. The health of the community, the preservation of knowledge, the question of whether the next generation will remember and honor what came before. Women work together to prepare the evening meal, their conversation flowing easily, punctuated by laughter, by gossip, by the quiet sharing of knowledge. How to identify edible plants from poisonous lookalikes, which herbs heal which ailments, when the rains will come based on the behavior of animals and the appearance of the sky, how to read the signs in nature that indicate change, the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years passed down through example and practice and patient explanation, knowledge that means the difference between thriving and merely surviving, between health and sickness, between life and death. Young men return from hunting, carrying an antelope slung on poles between them, their faces bright with success, with the pride of providers, eager to tell the story of the hunt. How they tracked the herd across the grasslands for hours, following prints in the soil, reading the signs of passage, how they worked together to separate one animal from the group, using their knowledge of antelope behavior, how the oldest hunter made the kill with a spear thrown with practiced precision, the culmination of decades of practice, of muscle memory built through countless throws. And as they tell their tale, they are not just recounting events but transmitting knowledge, teaching the younger ones who listen with rapt attention, showing them through story and gesture how to read tracks, how to move quietly through grass, how to throw a spear accurately, how to work together as a team, passing down the accumulated wisdom of their people in the way humans have always done, through story, through example, through the living transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next. And later, when the meal is finished and the dishes have been cleaned and put away, when the children have been settled for sleep, their small bodies curled on sleeping mats, when the night has deepened and the stars have emerged in their full glory, filling the sky from horizon to horizon with a brilliance we can barely imagine in our light-polluted modern world, thousands upon thousands of stars visible, the Milky Way, a glowing river across the darkness. Then the people gather around the fires, and they sing, and they dance, and they tell stories, stories of the ancestors, of great hunters whose skills were legendary, of wise leaders who guided the community through difficult times, of loves won and lost, of challenges overcome through courage and cleverness, of the time before time when the world was new and the gods walked among humans. Stories that encode history, that preserve knowledge of ancient migrations and old conflicts and alliances formed generations ago, that bind the community together with shared narratives, shared identity, shared purpose. And one storyteller, perhaps a specialist who has spent years learning the tales, perhaps simply someone with the gift of words, someone whose voice can hold an audience spellbound, speaks of the stars, points to particular patterns in the sky, traces with a finger the path of certain celestial bodies, and explains how these movements mark the seasons, how they guide travelers across the featureless grasslands, how they connect the earth to the heavens, how they reveal the great patterns that govern existence. And the listeners nod, and remember, and the knowledge is preserved, passed forward, kept alive in the living memory of the people, not written in books that can be lost or burned, but encoded in the minds and practices of the community, transmitted through the generations in an unbroken chain that stretches back to the first humans who looked up and wondered at the lights in the sky. This scene played out, in variations, across the Sahara for thousands of years. From the start of the African humid period, around 10,000 BCE, until the final communities were forced to abandon their homes as the desert encroached, as the grass died, as the rivers dried, as the paradise became wasteland. And during those millennia, human civilization was born and nurtured in this green landscape, experimenting, innovating, creating the foundations upon which later cultures would build. But nothing lasts forever. Not civilizations, not climates, not even deserts are permanent features of our planet's face. They come and go, responding to forces beyond human control, to orbital variations that alter the amount and distribution of solar radiation reaching Earth, to changes in ocean currents that shift rainfall patterns, to feedback loops in the climate system that amplify small variations into dramatic transformations, to the countless interlocking factors that determine whether a region gets rain or drought, whether it blooms with life or withers into barrenness. Around 5000 BCE, the rains began to fail. Not all at once, not in a single catastrophic drought that killed everything overnight, but gradually, decade by decade, century by century, each generation experiencing slightly less rain than their parents, the monsoons weakening, their track shifting southward, the rivers running lower each year, the lakes beginning to shrink, exposing cracked mudflats at their margins, vegetation retreating, the tall grasses giving way to shorter scrub, the forests thinning and dying. And the people adapted, as humans always do. They moved their settlements closer to the remaining water sources. They ranged farther in search of pasture for their cattle. They intensified their fishing, their hunting, trying to extract more from an environment that was giving less each year. For a while, for generations, it worked. Archaeological sites from this transitional period show continued occupation, continued culture, continued artistic production, and technological innovation. But there is also evidence of stress. Burials become simpler, grave goods less elaborate, suggesting reduced surplus, harder times, less ability to invest resources in elaborate farewell ceremonies. The pottery becomes more utilitarian, less decorated, as if there was no longer time or energy for purely aesthetic considerations, as if every moment must be devoted to survival, to finding enough food and water to last another day, another season, another year. And the rock art changes too, the later panels at Tassili showing a shift in subject matter and tone, scenes of conflict appearing, of warriors with weapons, of fortified settlements with walls and defenders, suggesting competition over dwindling resources, the breakdown of earlier cooperation as scarcity breeds desperation, as communities that once traded peacefully begin to fight over water sources and grazing lands, as the social bonds that held the Green Sahara together begin to fray under the pressure of environmental crisis. And gradually, inevitably, inexorably, the settlements were abandoned. One by one, family by family, community by community. The people moved, some to the Nile Valley where the great river still flowed, watering a narrow strip of green through an increasingly arid landscape, some south to the Sahel where rain still fell, though less reliably than before, some north to the Mediterranean coast where the sea brought moisture and life, carrying their knowledge and culture and memories to new homes, seeding new civilizations with the expertise developed during the millennia of the Green Sahara. Imagine that migration. Imagine being forced to leave the land where your ancestors had lived for generations, where every rock and tree held memories, where the graves of your grandparents and great-grandparents lay, where you had expected to live out your days and be buried beside your ancestors. Imagine gathering what you could carry, your most precious possessions, your tools that represent generations of accumulated knowledge, your seeds for planting in whatever new land you might find, your children confused and frightened by this upheaval, and setting out into an uncertain future, following rumors of water, of green land, of places where life might still be possible. where your skills might still sustain you. Traveling across landscapes growing increasingly hostile, where the water sources you had relied on were dry, where the grasslands had turned to scrub and sand, where the journey itself threatened death from thirst or exhaustion, or attacked by predators or hostile groups of desperate refugees like yourselves. Some groups traveled together, entire communities maintaining their cohesion as they moved, bringing their social structures, their leaders and specialists, their elders who carried the accumulated knowledge of generations, and when they settled in new lands, when they found places where water still flowed and crops would grow, they brought their old ways, their knowledge of astronomy and agriculture, their artistic traditions developed over millennia, their stories of a green paradise lost to time, their wisdom hard-won through generations of observation and experiment. And these knowledge systems merged with the cultures they encountered, creating new syntheses, new civilizations that carried forward the legacy of the Green Sahara, even as the desert buried its physical remains, even as the memory of that lost world faded into legend and myth, even as the reality of what had been there became increasingly hard to believe as the desert expanded and people forgot that it had ever been anything else. And behind them, inexorably, relentlessly, the sand came, covering their homes stone by stone, their temples and gathering places, their fields where crops once grew, their graves where ancestors were buried with love and care, burying their entire world beneath dunes that shifted and flowed like frozen waves of honey-colored time, hiding the evidence of their existence so thoroughly that for thousands of years no one knew they had been here. No one remembered the Green Sahara except in the vaguest of legends. No one suspected that beneath the sand lay the ruins of a civilization that had flourished and created and contributed to the great stream of human achievement. Until now, until the age of satellites and ground-penetrating radar and archaeological techniques sophisticated enough to extract meaning from fragmentary evidence, until researchers from around the world turned their attention to the Sahara and began asking questions. What was here before the desert? Who lived here? What did they achieve? What can they teach us about resilience and adaptation in the face of climate change? About human ingenuity and creativity? About the fundamental nature of civilization itself? And with each excavation, each satellite survey, each analysis of ancient pollen or animal bones or pottery fragments, with each new piece of evidence carefully catalogued and studied, the picture grows clearer, more detailed, more awe-inspiring. We see now that the Green Sahara was not just inhabited but flourishing, that its people were not primitive but sophisticated, that they contributed fundamentally to the development of human civilization, that their legacy lives on in the cultures that descended from them, in the agricultural techniques they pioneered, in the astronomical knowledge they accumulated, in the artistic traditions they established. But there is something else, something deeper that this lost civilization can teach us. As we lie here tonight, drifting towards sleep, contemplating the rise and fall of this ancient world, we cannot help but think about our own moment, our own civilization, our own relationship with climate and environment, our own future in a warming world. Because the people of the Green Sahara did not choose for their world to end, they did not vote for desertification, they could not have prevented the orbital variations that weakened the African monsoon. They were not responsible for the climate shift that transformed their paradise into wasteland. And yet, they endured it. They adapted. They moved. They survived. They carried forward their culture and knowledge and passed it on to future generations. They did not give up, did not despair, did not cease to be human, even as their world collapsed around them. And in their story we find both warning and hope. Warning because it demonstrates how profoundly climate can reshape the human world, how quickly in geological terms, abundance can become scarcity, how no civilization is immune to environmental change, how the stable conditions we take for granted can shift in ways we cannot control, but also hope. Because if they could adapt, if they could maintain their humanity through such upheaval, if they could preserve knowledge and culture and community, even as their world was literally disappearing beneath the sand, then perhaps we too can face our challenges with courage and resilience. Perhaps we too can adapt without losing what makes us human. Perhaps we too can pass forward the best of what we know and value even as we navigate unprecedented changes. Perhaps their example can teach us something about what matters most, about what must be preserved, about what it means to be human in the face of forces larger than ourselves. Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight, for allowing me to guide you through this lost world, for listening with open mind and heart to the story of people who lived and loved and created so long ago. If this exploration has touched something in you, has sparked wonder or contemplation, or simply helped you relax into this moment of quiet, please consider subscribing to Simply About Earth, where we explore our planet's deep history and hidden stories, where every video is an invitation to slow down, to wonder, to connect with the profound mysteries that surround us, where curiosity finds its quiet corner and wonder takes its time. And now, as we come to rest, as the journey ends and sleep approaches with gentle inevitability, let us return once more to the desert, to that vast silence that covers so much, to the sand that holds so many secrets, so much history, so much life, so much human striving and hoping and dreaming. The wind blows across the dunes, shifting them grain by grain, the same wind that once rustled through grasslands tall enough to hide a standing human, that once carried the scent of rain across lakes that sparkled under the sun, that once cooled the faces of ancient herders as they watched their cattle, that dried the laundry spread on rocks by the river, that carried children's laughter across settlements long since buried. It blows now, this eternal wind, and in its voice you can hear, if you listen closely, if you let yourself truly listen with more than your ears, the echo of all those vanished voices, the whisper of the past speaking to the present, telling us that everything changes, that nothing is permanent except change itself, that civilizations rise and fall like the sun rises and sets, that empires crumble and cities turn to dust, and even the mightiest works of humanity eventually return to the earth from which they came. But also that the human spirit endures, that we adapt, that we survive, that we carry forward the knowledge and wisdom of our ancestors, that we are resilient beyond measure, that we can face almost anything if we face it together, with courage, with hope, with the recognition that we are part of something larger and more enduring than any individual life or civilization. Sleep now. Let these thoughts drift through your mind like clouds across that ancient sky, like the stars that turn overhead in their eternal dance, the same stars that guided those Saharan astronomers as they mapped the heavens, that they watched and studied and used to mark the seasons and navigate across vast distances, the same stars that shine on you tonight as you lie in your bed, warm and safe, connected across time to all those who came before, to all who will come after. Sleep and dream perhaps of green grass waving in the wind, each blade catching the light, of rivers flowing clear and cold over smooth stones worn by millennia of patient water, of elephants trumpeting in the distance, their calls echoing across the plains, of people gathering around fires under a sky full of stars, telling stories, singing songs, living and loving and being fully human in ways that transcend time and culture and the countless superficial differences that separate us. Sleep, as the desert sleeps, patient, eternal, holding its secrets, its memories, its buried civilizations close like a mother holding her children, waiting for the rains to return, because they will return, in time. In the deep time of the planet, the Sahara will green again, as it has greened before, as it will green again, because nothing is permanent, not the desert, not the grassland, not even the rocks themselves. Only change is constant. Only the great cycles of the planet, of climate, of life. Sleep, and in your sleeping know that you are part of these cycles, part of the great wheel of existence, that turns and turns and never stops, that your life is a thread in a tapestry extending back through all of human history, through all of Earth's history, back to the beginning, to the first spark of life in the ancient seas, to the first molecule that could reproduce itself, to the formation of the planet itself from the dust of dying stars. All connected, all one, all part of the same grand story of matter becoming conscious, of the universe waking up and looking at itself through our eyes. And in this knowledge there is comfort, there is peace, there is the deep relaxation that comes from recognizing your place in the universe. Not separate, not isolated, not alone, but woven into the very fabric of existence, a necessary part of the whole, your life mattering in ways you cannot fully comprehend, rippling out through time and space, affecting others, changing the world in small ways that accumulate, that add up to something larger than you can see. The sand whispers, grain sliding against grain with a sound like silk, building dunes, then eroding them, moving, always moving, and beneath the sand, the ruins wait, patient, silent, holding the memory of when this place was green, when water flowed in abundance, when life flourished in forms we can barely imagine, when humans built their first great civilization in Africa, under the same sky that spreads above you now, under the same stars that witness their achievements and their ultimate dissolution into time. And you are drifting now, drifting like that sand on the wind, like those ancient peoples drifting across the landscape in search of water, in search of home, in search of a place to rest. And you are finding it now, that place of rest, letting go of the day with all its demands and stresses, letting go of worry about tomorrow, letting go of everything except this moment, this breath, this gentle slide into sleep, this dissolution of consciousness into the warm darkness of rest. The darkness gathers, soft, welcoming, like the darkness that falls over the desert each night, complete, total, unbroken, pierced only by starlight, by the ancient light that has travelled across vast distances to reach your eyes, light that left its source while those ancient Saharans were building their stone circles, while they were herding their cattle through morning mist, while they were painting on rock walls by firelight, while they were living and dying and passing on their knowledge to their children who would pass it to their children in an unbroken chain that leads somehow miraculously to you. And that light reaches you now, connecting past and present, bridging the gap between then and now, between the living and the dead, between the known and the unknown. And in its gentle glow you can rest, you can let go, you can trust that you are held, supported, part of something vast and ancient and enduring, part of a story that began before you and will continue after you, but in which your part is essential, necessary, unique. Sleep, sleep, as the ages sleep beneath the sand, as the civilizations sleep, as the earth itself sleeps through its long cycles of change and transformation, turning on its axis, orbiting the sun, spinning through space as it has for billions of years, as it will for billions more. Sleep and dream, dream of green lands and flowing water, dream of people long dead who were once as alive as you, who loved as intensely, who feared as deeply, who hoped as fervently, who dreamed their own dreams under those same eternal stars. Sleep, sleep, sleep. Let consciousness drift away like clouds dissipating in the desert sun, like mist evaporating from morning rivers that no longer flow, like memory fading, softening, becoming legend, becoming myth, becoming the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, where we came from, what we might become. The wind blows, the sand shifts, the stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns unchanged since the formation of the solar system, and beneath it all, beneath the desert, beneath the ruins, beneath the bones and pottery and stone tools, beneath everything, the earth turns, patient, eternal, holding all of history in its embrace, holding you, holding me, holding all of humanity, all of life, in its vast and ancient memory. And you are part of that memory now, as you drift into sleep, becoming part of the great story, the long story that will never end, the story of life on Earth, of consciousness emerging from matter like flowers emerging from soil, of humans learning to shape their world, of civilizations rising and falling like waves on an endless shore, of knowledge accumulated and passed forward through the generations, of love and loss and hope and perseverance. Sleep now, deeply, peacefully, completely, knowing you are connected, knowing you are part of something larger than yourself, knowing that your life matters, that your story is woven into the great tapestry of existence, that you carry forward the legacy of all those who came before, of those ancient Saharans who watched the stars and built stone circles and herded cattle and painted on rocks, who adapted and endured and passed their knowledge forward, who survived the drying of their world and seeded new civilizations in distant lands, whose legacy lives on in you, in all of us, in the fact that we are here, now, conscious, aware, wondering, and tomorrow you will wake and carry that knowledge forward in your own way, and live your life with whatever wisdom you can muster, and add your thread to the tapestry that our ancestors began weaving millennia ago. But tonight you rest, you sleep, you dream, you drift on the edge between consciousness and unconsciousness, between past and present, between the desert and the grassland, between waking and sleeping, between being and not being. Sleep, sleep, sleep. Let go, let go, let go. The Sahara covers you like a blanket of sand, warm, safe, eternal, protecting and preserving everything beneath it, and beneath it all, beneath everything, the memory remains, the green Sahara persists, not in physical form but in the land itself, in the rocks and bones and artifacts, in the stories we tell, in the knowledge we carry, in the wonder we feel when we contemplate these mysteries, in the connection we feel to those long-dead people who are so much like us. Sleep, sleep, sleep. And in your sleeping, remember you are part of something vast. Remember you are connected across time and space to all who came before and all who will come after. Remember the green Sahara and the people who lived there. Remember that nothing is permanent except change. Remember that we endure. Remember, 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 remember. And now, in the deep darkness, in the quiet place beyond thought, beyond memory, beyond time itself, there is only peace, only rest, only the gentle rhythm of breathing, in and out, like the tide on ancient shores that no longer exist, like the wind across ancient grasslands now buried beneath sand, like the pulse of life itself, continuing, enduring, eternal, unstoppable. Sleep, sleep, sleep. The stars shine on in their courses. The earth turns on its axis. The universe expands in its infinite vastness. And you are here, now, in this moment, safe, held, loved, part of the great unfolding, part of the mystery, part of the wonder that is existence itself. Sleep, 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 and dream of green lands beneath an endless sky. Dream of people gathering around fires under stars. Dream of knowledge passed from hand to hand across the ages. Dream of resilience. Dream of adaptation. Dream of survival. Dream of hope. Dream of love that transcends death and time. Dream of connection that links us all. Sleep, sleep, sleep. As the Sahara sleeps, as the buried cities sleep, as the ancient herders sleep beneath the sand, as all the generations sleep who came before, as you too now sleep, peaceful, restful, complete, whole. Sleep, 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 sleep. The desert holds its secrets close, revealing them reluctantly, one grain of sand at a time, and there is so much we still don't know, so many questions yet to answer. How many settlements remain undiscovered beneath the dunes? What technologies did they develop that left no trace? What philosophies did they contemplate as they watched the stars wheel overhead? What love stories played out under those stars? What heartbreaks? What moments of triumph and despair? What ordinary days of ordinary people living ordinary lives that were nonetheless precious and unique and full of meaning? But perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain. Perhaps the very incompleteness of our knowledge is valuable, because it leaves room for wonder, for imagination, for the recognition that history is not a closed book but an ongoing conversation, a dialogue between past and present, between the evidence we have and the questions we ask, between the dead whose voices are forever silent and the living who try to understand and honor what they achieved. And in your dreams tonight, in those strange landscapes where logic bends and time flows differently, where past and present merge into something timeless, you might find yourself walking through the green Sahara, feeling the grass beneath your feet, soft and cool with morning dew, hearing the sounds of a world so alive it hums with energy, the buzz of insects, the calls of birds, the distant rumble of thunder promising afternoon rain. You might see faces, weathered by sun and wind, but smiling, people who have learned to thrive in this paradise, who know every plant and animal, who can read the sky like we read books, who have accumulated wisdom over countless generations, wisdom about how to live in harmony with the land, how to take what is needed without destroying, how to give back, how to maintain the delicate balance that allows abundance to continue. And they might look at you, these dream figures, these echoes of real people who lived so long ago, and in their eyes you might see recognition, kinship, the understanding that you are family, that the same blood runs in your veins, that you carry their legacy in your very DNA, that everything you are was built on foundations they laid, that your existence honors their struggle and perseverance. And they might smile, these ancestors, and nod, and return to their work, to the eternal tasks of living, of feeding families, of teaching children, of maintaining the bonds that hold communities together, of watching the stars, of painting on rocks, of singing the old songs, of passing forward the accumulated wisdom of their people, knowing that one day, thousands of years in a future they cannot imagine, someone will remember, someone will honor what they achieved, someone will recognize that they mattered, that their lives had meaning, that they contributed to the great human story. And you, drifting deeper now into sleep, into that place where dreams arise like morning mist from rivers, where the boundaries between self and world dissolve, where you are simultaneously individual and part of everything. You carry them with you, carry their story, their courage, their resilience, their hope. And in carrying it, you honor it. You keep it alive. You ensure that they are not truly lost, not completely erased by the desert that covered their world. Because nothing is ever truly lost as long as someone remembers, as long as someone tells the story, as long as someone looks at the sand and wonders what lies beneath. And you, lying in your bed, warm and safe, drifting in and out of consciousness, you are that someone. You are the one who remembers, who honors, who connects past to present, who ensures that the people of the Green Sahara are not forgotten. And perhaps that is the greatest gift we can give to those who came before. Not monuments of stone that weather and crumble, not written records that fade and decay, but simply this, remembering, acknowledging, recognizing that they lived, that they mattered, that their lives had value and meaning, that we stand on their shoulders, that we are here because they endured, because they adapted, because they never gave up even when their world was ending around them. Sleep, sleep, sleep. And let that recognition bring peace. Let it settle over you like a warm blanket, like sand covering ruins, protective, preserving. Let it carry you down into the deepest rest, where there are no thoughts, no worries, no divisions between past and present, self and other, waking and sleeping, just peace, just rest, just the eternal now that encompasses all time. The desert breathes. If you could hear it, if you could listen with ears attuned to deep time, you would hear its breath, slow, patient, the breath of something that has existed for millions of years and will exist for millions more, that has seen species rise and fall, continents drift, oceans dry and reform. And in the rhythm of that breath, in that ancient patience, there is comfort, reminder that all things pass, all things change, all things continue in new forms, and you breathe with it, your breath synchronizing with the breath of the desert, with the breath of the earth itself, in and out, slow and deep, each exhale releasing, letting go, dissolving, each inhale so gentle you barely notice it, barely feel the air entering your lungs, just a slight expansion, then release, expansion, release, the rhythm of life itself. The rhythm that has continued unbroken since the first organism drew in nutrients and expelled waste, the rhythm that connects all living things across all time. Sleep, 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 and know that you are safe, protected by the accumulated wisdom of thousands of generations, guided by the example of people who faced challenges greater than any we know and survived, strengthened by the resilience bred into our very genes by ancestors who refused to give up, who kept going when everything seemed lost, who found hope in despair, who created beauty in hardness, who loved in the face of death. The sand settles, grain by grain finding its place in the eternal dunes, and you settle with it, thought by thought, tension by tension, relaxing into the support beneath you, into the warmth around you, into the safety of this moment, this breath, this heartbeat, letting go of everything that is not this, this. And somewhere beneath the sand, preserved in the darkness, in the silence, in the patient earth, the ruins remain, waiting, always waiting, for the day when they might be revealed again, when the wind might shift, when humans might dig, when the desert might give up its secrets. And until that day, they rest, they sleep, they hold their stories close, just as you hold yours close, as you drift deeper, deeper, into sleep. The stars witness it all, distant and eternal, burning in the darkness of space, light years away but seeming close enough to touch in the clear desert sky. They saw the green Sahara at its height, saw the people building and creating, saw the slow dying as climate changed, saw the migrations, the abandonments, the sand covering everything. And they see you now, lying in your bed, dreaming of times long past, connecting across the centuries to people you never met but somehow know, somehow understand, somehow love. And they will continue watching, long after you are gone, long after everyone living now has passed from memory, long after our civilization has risen to whatever heights it will reach, and fallen to whatever depths await. They will continue, constant, eternal, witnesses to everything, judges of nothing, simply present, simply shining, simply being. And in their example there is peace, the peace of acceptance, of continuation, of being part of something so vast that your individual existence, while precious, while unique, while mattering in ways beyond comprehension, is also just one moment in an infinite story, one breath in an eternal respiration, one thought in the mind of the universe, thinking itself into existence. Sleep, sleep, sleep. Let go of being separate. Let go of being alone. Let go of being anything other than this moment, this breath, this heartbeat, this gentle dissolution into rest, into peace, into the great sleep that restores, that heals, that prepares us for tomorrow's challenges, for tomorrow's joys, for tomorrow's continuation of the eternal story. And the green Sahara sleeps with you, beneath the sand, beneath the time, beneath everything. It sleeps and dreams of rain, of rivers flowing, of grass growing, of elephants returning, of children laughing, of a future when it might live again, when the cycles might turn, when the climate might shift, when paradise might return. And in that dream, it is patient, because it knows, it has seen, it understands that all things return, all things cycle, all things come again. Sleep, 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 and rest in the knowledge that you have honored the past tonight, that you have remembered those who were forgotten, that you have connected to your ancestors across the vast expanse of time, that you are part of something larger, something older, something that will continue long after you, part of the great human story that began in Africa and spread across the world, part of the legacy of the green Sahara and all who lived there, part of the eternal mystery of consciousness arising from matter, of life emerging from non-life, of meaning being created in a universe that began without meaning. You are that meaning, you are that consciousness, you are that life, and in sleeping you honor it all. In resting you prepare to continue it tomorrow. In dreaming you connect to all who have slept and dreamed before, across all time, across all space, all connected in this simple act of letting go, of trusting, of surrendering to sleep. Sleep, 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 deeply, completely, peacefully. The Sahara is silent now. The wind has stilled, the sand is motionless, and beneath it all, the ancient world rests, preserved, protected, waiting. Just as you rest, preserved in this moment, protected by the darkness, waiting for dawn. Sleep, 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 sleep. Good night from Simply About Earth. Sleep well.